What would you do if a stranger fixing a simple leak in your home suddenly looked at you with fear in his eyes and whispered, "Come home now, but come alone"? That's exactly what happened to me. The strange part? He said it while standing in the office of my late wife, a room I hadn't touched since the day we buried her. At first I thought the man was crazy, but 30 minutes later, a hidden box inside the wall, a letter written in my wife's handwriting, and a flash drive full of secrets would reveal something I never imagined. The woman I thought I knew better than anyone had been living a life I knew nothing about, and the truth she left behind would change everything. The dripping started so quietly that I barely noticed it at first. A faint, irregular tap somewhere in the house, like rainwater falling from a gutter after a storm. At first, I assumed it was outside. The wind had been strong that week, and small noises had become common in the empty house. But the sound kept repeating, steady and patient, echoing faintly through the hallway. Drip, pause, drip, pause. It was the kind of sound that slowly works its way into your mind until it becomes impossible to ignore. For 2 days, I tried to pretend it wasn't there. I turned up the television louder than usual. I closed doors between rooms. But the quietness of the house only made the sound stand out more. Ever since Emma passed away 8 months earlier, silence had become the most noticeable thing in my life. The house that once felt warm and busy now carried a strange stillness, as if the walls themselves were waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. The drip seemed to be coming from the far end of the hallway. Emma's office. I hadn't stepped inside that room since the day of her funeral. After returning from the cemetery, I had walked through the house in a numb fog, closing doors that reminded me too much of her. Her office had been the hardest. She spent most of her days there, working quietly at her desk near the window, surrounded by files and notebooks that always looked perfectly organized. When I closed the door that afternoon, I told myself it would only be temporary. Temporary somehow turned into months. Now the dripping pipe was forcing me to face the one place in the house I had tried hardest to avoid. I stood outside the office door for a long moment before unlocking it. The key turned with a soft click that echoed down the hallway. When I pushed the door open, a faint smell of paper and old wood drifted out, the same scent that used to fill the room whenever Emma worked late. Everything inside looked exactly the same as the last day she had been there. Her desk stood neatly arranged near the window, sunlight touching the edge of the wooden surface. A pen holder sat beside a closed notebook. A framed photograph of the two of us during a vacation years ago rested quietly beside her computer monitor. Even the chair remained tucked carefully under the desk, as if she had simply stepped out for a few minutes. The dripping sound was clearer now. It came from somewhere behind the desk, inside the wall. I stood there for a moment, listening. The noise echoed faintly through the pipes, each drop landing with a soft metallic tick. Fixing the leak was simple enough. I pulled out my phone and searched for a local plumber, explaining that there was a slow drip inside a wall in the back office. The man on the phone said someone could come that afternoon. I spent the next hour pacing the living room, trying not to think about the office down the hallway. Every now and then the faint dripping reached my ears again, reminding me that the room was open now, that the quiet space Emma once used was no longer sealed away from the rest of the house. When the doorbell finally rang, the sudden sound made me jump slightly. Outside stood a man holding a metal toolbox in one hand. He looked like any other tradesman you might see fixing pipes around the neighborhood. Work boots covered in dust, dark hair, a slightly tired expression that suggested he had already been on several jobs that day. A small name tag on his shirt read, "Daniel." "You called about a leak?" he asked. "Yes," I said, stepping aside to let him in. He followed me through the living room and down the hallway. As we approached the office door, I felt a small knot tighten in my chest again. I pushed the door open and gestured toward the wall behind the desk. "It's coming from somewhere in there." He nodded and walked in, setting his toolbox on the floor before crouching beside the wall. For a few seconds he didn't speak. He simply listened. The drip echoed faintly again. "Sounds like a loose connection in the pipe," he said. "Should be a quick fix." He opened the toolbox and pulled out a wrench, sliding partway under the desk to reach the pipes near the base of the wall. I stayed near the doorway, watching quietly. The room felt strangely different with someone else inside it. For months, the office had existed in my memory as a frozen place, untouched by time. Now, the sound of metal tools and shifting pipes broke that stillness. Daniel twisted the wrench carefully. The pipe gave a faint metallic creak. He adjusted something again, leaning closer as he worked. Then suddenly he stopped. His arm froze in place. "You hear that?" he asked. I frowned slightly. "The dripping?" "No," he said slowly. "Something else." I listened carefully. All I could hear was the same slow drip. "I don't hear anything different." He slowly pulled himself back from under the desk and stood up. His eyes moved across the wall thoughtfully before he tapped lightly against the wooden panel near the floor. Tap. The sound was dull and solid. He moved his hand slightly to the right and tapped again. Tap. This time the sound was different. Hollow. He frowned slightly and tapped again in the same spot. The hollow echo returned. "That's strange," he murmured. "What is?" He crouched again and examined the long wooden panel running along the bottom of the wall. "Did you ever have work done in this room?" he asked. "Not that I know of." "Any remodeling or repairs?" "No," I said. "The house hasn't changed in years." He ran his fingers along a thin seam where two sections of wood met. "This piece doesn't match the rest of the wall," he said. I stepped closer, curiosity slowly replacing my earlier hesitation. "What do you mean?" "It looks like it was installed separately." He pulled a small flat tool from his pocket and gently slid it between the seams of the panel. The metal tip slipped into the gap more easily than expected. "Hold on," I said nervously. "What are you doing?" "Just checking something." He applied a little pressure. There was a soft click. The panel shifted outward slightly. My stomach tightened. "That shouldn't happen," he said quietly. He carefully pried the panel loose. It slid away from the wall with surprising ease. Behind it was a narrow, hollow space between the wooden beams. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The opening looked deliberate, like a small compartment hidden inside the wall. Daniel reached his hand inside carefully. His arm disappeared up to the wrist. He felt around for a moment, then his fingers closed around something. When he pulled his hand back out, he was holding a small metal box. He set it gently on Emma's desk. "Did you know this was here?" he asked. I stared at the box in disbelief. "No," I said slowly. The box looked simple and unremarkable. Rectangular, made of dull gray metal, about the size of a hardcover book. A small dial lock sat on the front, though it didn't appear to be secured. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. Emma had used this office every day. How could something like this exist inside the wall without me ever noticing? Daniel stepped back slightly, giving me space. "Looks like a lockbox," he said. The room suddenly felt much smaller. I could hear my own breathing as I reached for the lid. "You should probably open it," he added quietly. My hands felt strangely cold as I turned the small dial. The lock clicked easily. When I lifted the lid, 3 items rested neatly inside: a folded letter, a photograph, and a small black flash drive. My eyes immediately focused on the letter. Even before opening it, I recognized the handwriting on the outside. Emma's. The sight of it sent a wave of emotion through my chest. The plumber stood silently nearby as I carefully unfolded the paper. The words had been written slowly and clearly, the same careful handwriting she used whenever she wrote birthday cards or notes for the kitchen counter. I began to read. "If you are reading this, something has gone wrong." My heart began to pound. The quiet office suddenly felt filled with questions I didn't yet understand. I kept reading. "I never wanted you to find this unless it was absolutely necessary." My fingers trembled slightly as the meaning of the words started to sink in. Emma had hidden this letter inside the wall, hidden it so carefully that no one would ever discover it unless the panel was removed, unless something unexpected forced it open, like a leaking pipe. The next line made my breath catch. "For the last 2 years, I have been helping expose a financial fraud network connected to several powerful people." I blinked, certain I had misunderstood. Emma was an accountant who worked quietly from home. She avoided conflict and rarely spoke about work outside the office. But the letter continued. I couldn't tell you because it was dangerous, but if anything happens to me, this evidence must reach the authorities. My eyes slowly shifted toward the small flash drive resting beside the letter in the box. The realization settled over me like a sudden storm. The woman I thought I knew completely had apparently been carrying a secret hidden inside the very walls of our home. For a long moment after finishing the letter, I couldn't speak. The paper trembled slightly in my hands as I read the lines again, hoping they might somehow change meaning the second time. But the words stayed exactly the same. Emma's handwriting was unmistakable, careful, steady, and familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. Daniel stood beside the desk quietly, watching my reaction. "What does it say?" he asked gently. I lowered the paper slowly. "My wife." I paused, trying to organize the chaos forming in my mind. "She says she was investigating some kind of financial fraud." His expression changed instantly. "Let me see that." I handed him the letter. He read it quickly, his eyes moving faster with each line. When he reached the end, he exhaled slowly and leaned back against the desk. "Well," he said under his breath, "I didn't expect it to be that direct." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering right away, he picked up the photograph that had been inside the lockbox. It showed Emma sitting at a small cafe table across from a man whose face was turned slightly toward the camera. They looked like two people having a normal conversation, but the image carried a strange tension now that I knew it had been hidden inside the wall. Daniel flipped the photograph over. I leaned closer. On the back, written in Emma's handwriting, were 3 simple words. Daniel Reyes. Trust him. My stomach dropped. I slowly looked up at the man standing beside me. He was staring at the name too. Then he ran a hand over the back of his neck and let out a quiet sigh. "So, she left that in there," he said. "What?" I asked, my voice barely steady. He set the photo back on the desk and looked directly at me. "My name is Daniel Reyes." For a second, the room felt like it tilted. I stared at him, trying to decide whether this was some kind of strange coincidence or something far more complicated. "You're telling me the name on the photo is you?" "Yes." My mind raced. "You knew my wife?" He hesitated. "Not the way you think." That answer didn't help. "What does that mean?" Daniel pulled the desk chair out and sat down heavily, as if he suddenly felt the weight of something he had been carrying for a long time. "Your wife contacted me about a year ago," he said. "About what?" "About the fraud network she mentions in that letter." The words felt unreal. Emma had never said a single thing about any investigation. She rarely even complained about work. "What kind of fraud network?" I asked. "Money laundering, shell companies, hidden accounts, the kind of financial activity that moves millions of dollars without anyone noticing." My chest tightened. "And you're involved in that?" "Not involved," he said quickly. "Tracking it." He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. "I work with a small independent group that helps uncover financial crimes. Some of us used to work in banking or law enforcement. Others are analysts, people who know how to follow money trails when something doesn't add up." "And Emma contacted you?" He nodded. "She found irregularities in the accounts she was reviewing, transactions that didn't match the companies they were supposed to belong to. At first, she thought it was a mistake, but the deeper she looked, the bigger the pattern became." I tried to picture Emma doing something like that, sitting at this desk late at night, examining numbers and reports not just for work, but for something much larger. "She reached out through an anonymous email," Daniel continued. "At first, I didn't even know who she was, just someone claiming they had evidence of a laundering operation connected to powerful people." "Powerful how?" "Business leaders, investors, people with influence." A cold feeling crept into my stomach. "And she kept working on it?" "Yes," he said quietly. "For months." I rubbed my forehead, trying to process everything. "Why didn't she tell me?" Daniel's eyes softened slightly. She said you didn't know. That doesn't answer the question. He paused before speaking again. She was afraid. Of what? That if the wrong people discovered what she was doing, they might try to pressure her, or threaten someone close to her. The words settled heavily in the room. She thought they might come after me, I said slowly. He nodded. That's exactly what she thought. I leaned back against the desk, suddenly feeling weak. All those nights she stayed up late in this office, all those quiet evenings when she seemed distracted or tired. I had assumed it was normal work stress. I never imagined she was dealing with something dangerous. But why are you here now? I asked. Daniel looked toward the open wall panel behind the desk. I came to check if the evidence was still here. The answer hit me immediately. You weren't here because of the leak. No. You knew about the box. Yes. The realization made my pulse quicken. So the pipe. It really is leaking, he said. But I arranged the service call. I stared at him. You set this up? Your wife told me where the evidence was hidden in case something ever happened to her. My throat tightened. She expected someone to find it? She hoped no one would need to. He gestured toward the flash drive sitting in the open box. But if she disappeared, or if something went wrong, she wanted someone she trusted to retrieve it. And that someone was you. Yes. A long silence filled the office. Finally, I asked the question that had been building in my mind since he revealed his name. If you already knew where the box was, why didn't you come sooner? Daniel looked down at his hands. Because for months after your wife passed away, I wasn't sure what happened to her. The words felt like ice. What do you mean? She stopped responding to messages suddenly. No warning, no explanation, just silence. I swallowed. That was around the time she got sick. He nodded slowly. I eventually learned she passed away. But by then the investigation we were working on had already attracted attention. Attention from who? The people involved in the fraud. A chill moved through my chest. You think they knew what she was doing? I'm almost certain. My eyes moved toward the front window of the office. The quiet street outside looked perfectly normal, but suddenly it didn't feel normal anymore. Daniel followed my gaze. That's why I told you something earlier, he said. What? When I said you should come alone. My heart skipped. Why would that matter? He stood up and walked to the window, carefully adjusting the blinds to look outside. Because if anyone else knew about this evidence, they might try to find it. I felt the weight of the flash drive sitting inside the lockbox. And if they find it? I asked. They'll do everything they can to make sure it never reaches the authorities. He turned back toward me. That's why your wife hid it so carefully. The office suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls themselves were closing in. I looked down at the flash drive again, such a small object. Yet according to Emma's letter, it contained proof of something powerful enough to frighten dangerous people. What's on it? I asked. Daniel picked up the drive carefully. Everything she collected. He pulled a laptop from his bag and placed it on the desk. If the files are still intact, this could expose an entire financial network. My heart pounded harder as he inserted the drive into the computer. The screen lit up with folders and documents. Rows of files filled the display. Transaction logs, company records, account numbers. Daniel's eyebrows slowly lifted as he opened the first document. Wow, he murmured. What? This isn't just evidence. He scrolled through more files. This is a roadmap. I stepped closer to the screen. What do you mean? He pointed at a series of numbers and names appearing across multiple spreadsheets. These transactions connect dozens of companies across multiple countries. He opened another file. And look at this. More records appeared. Transfers worth millions moving between hidden accounts. Layer after layer of financial movement designed to hide the original source of the money. Daniel leaned back in his chair slowly. Your wife didn't just find suspicious activity. He looked up at me with a mixture of shock and respect. She uncovered the entire operation. For a long time, neither of us spoke after Daniel said those words. The quiet office felt heavier than it had just minutes before. The glow of the laptop screen illuminated the desk where Emma used to work every day. And now the same desk held the evidence of something much larger than either of us had expected. I stared at the rows of files on the screen, my mind struggling to keep up with the reality forming around me. Every document Daniel opened seemed to reveal another layer of hidden transactions. Company names appeared over and over again, but they were connected in ways that didn't make sense unless someone had been deliberately trying to hide money. "This is bigger than I thought," Daniel said quietly. "How big?" I asked. He scrolled through another spreadsheet. "These transfers alone add up to more than $40 million. The number made my stomach twist. 40 million. Emma had been tracking this from the small office in our home. "How long was she working on this?" I asked. "At least 2 years, according to the letter." I leaned back against the desk, looking around the room again. The shelves filled with binders, the neat stacks of paper, the familiar chair she used every day. For months I had seen these things as reminders of the life we shared. Now they looked different. Now they looked like the workspace of someone quietly uncovering something dangerous. Daniel clicked open another folder. Inside were scanned documents and recorded notes. Emma had organized everything carefully, labeling each file with dates and descriptions. Some of the notes explained how the money moved through fake companies before appearing in legitimate business accounts. "She documented everything," Daniel said. "Of course she did," I replied softly. Emma had always been meticulous. Every bill, every receipt, every document in our house had a place. It seemed that habit had helped her build something powerful. Daniel suddenly stopped scrolling. "What is it?" I asked. He pointed to a document on the screen. "This file links several of these shell companies to the same group of investors. Is that important? It means the same people are controlling the entire network." He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face. "This is exactly the kind of proof investigators look for." My eyes drifted to the letter still lying on the desk. Emma had written that the evidence needed to reach the authorities. She had trusted that someone would finish what she started. The thought filled my chest with a strange mixture of grief and pride. "I think we should take this to the police," I said. Daniel nodded slowly. "That's the right move. But if these people are powerful," I hesitated, "they might try to stop us." "That's possible." He closed the laptop halfway and looked at me seriously. "Which is why we shouldn't wait." The urgency in his voice made my pulse quicken again. "How soon?" "Tonight." The word hung in the air between us. Tonight. Part of me wanted to step away from the entire situation. My life had already been turned upside down by Emma's death. Now I was discovering that the quiet life we shared had been hiding secrets connected to criminals and millions of dollars. But another part of me felt something stronger. Emma had worked for years to collect this evidence. She had hidden it carefully to protect it. And now it had finally been discovered. "If we walk away," Daniel said quietly, "everything she risked will disappear." I looked at the flash drive again. It seemed impossibly small for something that carried so much weight. "She trusted you," Daniel added. Those words settled deep inside me. Emma had left a message knowing I might eventually read it. She had trusted that if the time came, I would do the right thing. I took a deep breath. "Then we finish it." Daniel gave a small nod of approval. He copied the files from the flash drive onto his laptop, and then onto a second backup drive. "Just in case," he said. The process took nearly 30 minutes. During that time, I walked slowly around the office, looking at the small details I had ignored for months. The framed photograph on the shelf, the notebook beside the lamp, the familiar mug she used for coffee every morning. Each object now felt like a reminder of her quiet determination. When Daniel finished copying the files, he closed the laptop. "Ready?" I glanced once more at the desk where the letter lay. Then I folded it carefully and placed it back in the lockbox. Yes. The drive downtown felt strangely quiet. The streets were nearly empty as the sun began to set behind the buildings. I watched the city lights flicker on one by one, while my mind replayed everything we had discovered in the office. Emma had lived with this secret for 2 years. 2 years of knowing she was uncovering something dangerous. 2 years of protecting me by staying silent. Daniel drove with focused attention, his eyes scanning the road occasionally as if he were checking for something unusual. "You think anyone knows we have the files?" I asked. "I doubt it," he said, "but we still shouldn't take chances." When we arrived at the federal building downtown, the tall glass doors reflected the dim evening sky. Inside, the lobby was brightly lit and nearly empty except for a security guard behind the front desk. Daniel approached him calmly. "We need to speak with someone from financial crimes," he said. The guard looked skeptical at first, but after a brief explanation and a quick call upstairs, we were escorted to a small office on the 3rd floor. 2 investigators entered the room a few minutes later. Daniel placed the laptop on the table and explained the situation. At first, their expressions were cautious, but as they began reviewing the files, that caution slowly changed. One of them leaned closer to the screen. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "My wife collected it," I replied quietly. They continued opening documents. Each new file seemed to raise their eyebrows higher. "These transaction records alone could open a full investigation," one of them said. Daniel pointed to another folder. "There's more." The investigators spent nearly an hour reviewing the material. Finally, one of them leaned back in his chair. "This is serious evidence," he said. "How serious?" I asked. He exchanged a glance with his partner. "Serious enough to bring down several people who thought they were untouchable." A strange feeling washed over me.